thank you very much. It's great to be here in Hudson. My name is Ovide Lamontagne. I'm a fourth-generation New Hampshire native, the son of New Hampshire farmers, mill workers, and dentists. And if growing up the son of a dentist doesn't build character, growing up with a name like Ovide does, guaranteed. The toughest name in politics, certainly in New Hampshire, if not nationally. It's great to be with you this evening. And here we are. It's almost the beginning of April in 2012. We're in the most important election cycle, I think, of our lifetime. And we've seen over the last few days here in the end of March arguments in the New Hampshire and the U.S. Supreme Court on the issue of Obamacare. And I don't think any case, any issue really has crystallized what this nation is about, what the role of the federal government is as opposed to the state, local people, local government, than this case. It's really lifted up for the people of the United States sort of a civics lesson. It's lifted up for us the concept of what it is the federal government can do, what it's empowered under the Constitution to do, and I think the arguments that we're hearing point out that the federal government is not empowered to tell you and me where we get our health care, how we have to provide for that health care, and it's certainly not empowered to tell the state of New Hampshire that it has to participate in a Medicaid program for purposes of covering all lives, which is what the federal government has done under this Affordable Care Act, which is now $2 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Now, you may say to yourself, well, Ovide, I think you're running for governor, right? And I am. I'm a candidate for governor. But I ran for U.S. Senate in 2010 for a lot of the same reasons I'm running for governor now. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010 to go to Washington to try to bring our federal government back into the four corners of the Constitution, to make sure that the government only did what the Constitution provided, keeping in mind that the Constitution is a limiting document, not a living document, and the powers of the federal government are limited by that federal Constitution. And we've seen, particularly over the last 50 years or so, government overreach from Washington in areas of education, health care, business regulation, and beyond, to the point where we are not able to sustain this nation at this rate of expenditure. We're out of balance terribly. We have a huge debt, and we are misguided in Washington. I submit to you, though, that the answer to solving this nation's problems isn't simply by sending people to Washington who understand the Constitution, who want to live and honor the Constitution. It's by electing people at the state level, governors in particular, who are willing to stay to Uncle Sam, get back into the four corners of the Constitution, get out of the classroom, get out of the operating room, and get out of the businesses of our state. It's about time we have strong leaders at the state level who are willing to push back on the federal government at all levels. And I want to be a governor for New Hampshire who will fight for New Hampshire and do exactly that. Obamacare, as it's proposed, is one of the greatest threats to New Hampshire's sovereignty, New Hampshire's way of life, New Hampshire's competitiveness, not just nationally but internationally. And the burden and cost of health care that's going to be imposed under Obamacare on our businesses alone is going to be very significant. Healthcare already is a significant challenge for business in terms of meeting the expectations of employees. So rather than go to a one-size-fits-all single-payer system, which is what this administration wants, a national healthcare program, socialized medicine, other people call it, we need to be moving just in the opposite direction. More free market forces, more competition, more insurance companies, more opportunities for businesses to pool their resources to access health care nationally or locally, or whatever's the best situation for their employees. Remove the mandates that are driving the cost of health care, and then provide that economic model that allows people to make decisions about where to get health care and what procedures they should have based on cost and quality. How many people actually make a decision as whether they go to one hospital or the other based on the cost of the service? Not too many people. I think we're moving in that direction, but ever so slowly. There ought to be a premium or an incentive for people to make a decision to get a colonoscopy at an ambulatory surgical care center rather than a hospital. And if you save $1,000 on the procedure by choosing that ambulatory surgical care center, you should get some money back. A percentage. Make us part of the free market. And we're not part of the free market right now, the way the system is designed. But this Obamacare is about civil liberties, it's about states' rights, it's about the economy of this nation. And we have to see it for what it is. And so, as a governor of New Hampshire, the very first thing I would do is to direct the Attorney General to join the other states of this country who are carrying the water for us right now and sue the federal government on Obamacare. And don't think for a minute that whatever the Supreme Court decides in June is going to settle the issue. They may even decide that the mandates at the federal level or at the state level are unconstitutional. But you can bet your bottom dollar that this Obama administration will try to enforce the parts of the law that haven't been struck down. And I don't believe the Supreme Court will do a page-by-page striking down of the provisions as Justice Scalia suggested in one of his questions earlier today or yesterday. It's going to be, this administration is determined to get us into socialized medicine, and they'll do it in pieces if they can't do it lock, stock, and barrel, as this law presently provides. I want you to know a little bit about me so that you can know and have some confidence that I have the strongest leadership and the only leadership capability and experience in the business sector, in government, and in the civic and charitable sector that I can bring to the governor's office. I'm, as I said, a New Hampshire native. I went to high school, Trinity High School, went to Catholic University undergraduate, met my wife, and the two of us became high school teachers for 3 years. She continued on. I went to law school in Wyoming, where my high school student council advisor had recruited Betty and I to teach back in the early 80s. Went to law school, and then clerk for a judge, and then came back home to Manchester. Grew up and located next door to my parents in a little house that we were able to buy when we were coming back. And we've been next door to my parents for 26 years. In fact, in 1997, we purchased my parents' house. So we live in the family homestead. My parents rent the little house that we had bought. So if you've ever seen the show Everybody Loves Raymond, ever see that show? That's us. That's us on steroids. And but that's the New Hampshire experience for a lot of families. Families have really worked together in New Hampshire, and we're a very mobile society. But you know, it's amazing. I run into people all the time. Young people who now become middle-aged people who have come back to home, come back to New Hampshire to enjoy the exceptional quality of life we have here. And so I started practicing law at Divine Willamette Branch in Manchester, one of our firms, our state's leading law firms. And I practice in business law largely. I'm a trial lawyer, a litigator for business, but I've also been a business counselor, working with large institutions. I'm outside general counsel of Catholic Medical Center, for example. So if I get excited about health care, because I practice in that area, I represent companies who are construction companies, private sector companies as well, or for-profit companies as well as not-for-profit organizations. And I've done that for 26 years. I'm a business owner of our firm. We have almost 200 employees. I've worked on, having a balanced budget, making sure that I can sign the paychecks of our employees, which I've done, so they're paid, and to make sure we have strategic planning and we have a very competitive firm. And I've been part of the business leadership of our firm. I've also been chairman of the board at St. Mary's Bank, one of the nation's first credit union, with $750 million in assets, over 60,000 members throughout southern New Hampshire. And it's the first credit union in the country because it was based on a truly New Hampshire ethic. People helping people. People at the turn of the century in Manchester, a lot of them French-Canadian immigrants, weren't accessing or able to access financial markets and the established banks. And so they had this idea, working with people from Canada, to start a credit union. And the New Hampshire legislature, you know what, said, go ahead. They passed the charter. They enacted that and created that credit union here in New Hampshire that's a not-for-profit financial institution. Not for profit, not for charity, but for service. And that's the credit union ethic. And we provide commercial loans, we provide real estate mortgages, and we were not part of the real estate meltdown, by the way, in 2008. And we provide financial services to members. And I've been involved with balancing the budget of that organization as a part of the board leadership, hiring staff, doing some things like converting from a defined benefit plan for our employees to a defined contribution plan. Those of you who know that is, in state government, for example, our employees are part of a defined benefit plan. They're promised a certain amount of money when they retire based on the last 3 years, for example, of their income and also other factors that are calculated. And they're guaranteed a certain percentage of that money, regardless of what the market does, regardless of what they might have invested on their own. A defined contribution plan puts the money in your control. You contribute towards your retirement, your employer matches it to some extent, and yet you control it and you own it at the end, but it's a defined contribution plan. Our state needs to move in that direction. The entire private sector has done that. Even the not-for-profit organizations have moved away from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. Make no mistake about it, pension reform is absolutely necessary in New Hampshire. We will not be able to sustain the current system if we do not make some substantial changes to it. We need to do it in concert, working with our state employees, and we should start right now creating a defined contribution plan for all new employees that come to state government, and then negotiate with our current employees about how to modify the system so it's sustainable. I have experience in working in this area as the chairman of St. Mary's Bank. So I've had experience working with business, representing businesses with our regulators in our state, dealing with things that are very challenging and very important. And in the end, I want to be a governor who can say New Hampshire is the best place to do business because we've moved to deregulate. We've moved to make it easier for businesses to start here. We've made it easier for businesses to grow here in New Hampshire. And we need to deregulate our economy, our marketplace, so that we are the refugee state for entrepreneurs. And the best way we can do that is something that will cost us nothing, and that's to adopt and enact right to work in New Hampshire. Are you with me on that? Do you think that's a good idea? Right to work doesn't take away collective bargaining rights for employees. What right to work does is respect the right of individual employees to opt out of a union membership. After I announced for governor and stated my position, which is one I've carried in other campaigns in the past, in support of right to work, I received a call from a woman in Manchester. She was an accountant whose husband died early, and his business needed to be unwound, and she took over the business to unwind it, to finish raising her son, who was in high school, and she was ready to enter into the workplace last summer. She applied for a job on a part-time basis. Very attractive job for her, met her needs in terms of her commitment. They liked her. They loved her, actually. They were excited to have her come on board. She went to sign the papers, and they gave her a last piece of paper, and it was a paper to join the local union. And she said, I don't want to join a union. I'm a part-time employee. Why should I join a union? And they said, well, we're a union shop. You have to sign up for the union. And she said, I'm opposed to what the union stands for, what I've read about it, particularly this union. And they said, but you have no choice. She didn't take that job. She had to leave it. And they didn't take her. They couldn't. That's what right to work is about, is enabling that woman to take that job. She may not have all the benefits that were negotiated with the union, but she can make that decision, and her employer should be able to make it with her. It's employee freedom of choice. No one should be afraid of right to work, but what it does, it sends a signal around the country that we respect that employee's right. And we stand with businesses and individuals. We're not going to lock them all up into one size fits all in the workplace. So we can do a lot in New Hampshire to make our businesses successful, to promote New Hampshire, to really bring us into a new era of prosperity. And what is more secure to a family, to an individual, than a good private sector job where you're adding to a product or to a service, you're able to pay for your mortgage, put bread on the table, provide education to your children. And that's what New Hampshire's about. It's taking care of our own without having to go to government. And we need to free up this marketplace. Steve Forbes wrote a book in 2010, which I would commend to any of you. It's called How Capitalism Will Save Us. And it's a great book. It breaks down the capitalist forces that work in a free market. And reading that book, I think to myself, that applies to New Hampshire. How capitalism will save us. Because if we don't take care of our work here in New Hampshire to make us the most attractive state, to try to insulate us from the national decline which this administration is taking us down, then we will never have a chance to provide to our children and our grandchildren the state that they deserve. At least one as good as the one we inherited from our forebears. And so our job is an important one at the state level. And you know what? If we do our job right, we're going to be part of saving America too. It's through the states that America will find or rediscover principles of freedom and liberty, prosperity, capitalism, and it's not by a Washington solution. And I think the people in this room understand that, know that, and believe it. I've been involved in government over the last 26 years. I was served as legal counsel to the state Senate, had a ringside seat to a very tough legislative session in 1991. And I learned the legislative process, how it works. And I'm in awe of the men and women who serve our state as $100 a year stipend paid people. I see one of the fellows here for whom I'm also an admirer of. And you have a number of state reps around the state and around the country, around this part of the state that have served us very well in New Hampshire. And I thank you, Sean, for your good work. And it's truly public service. It is, there's no doubt about it. But I've watched what it takes. It's not easy. But it means that people roll up their sleeves and work together. They may have issues that disagree about, but don't be disagreeable. You can be passionate without letting your passion for an issue consume you, consume your relationship with other people. And that was a tough time in 1991. It's a tough time now. Let's support the men and women who represent us, but let's encourage them to do it in a way that builds bridges, that gets us solutions. And on those lines, I want you to know that even though I'm speaking before what looks like a faithful Republican audience, if I'm elected governor and I'm asked to serve the people, I will leave the Republican label at the State House door. And I'll go into the governor's office with my conservative principles, of course. I won't abandon those, but I want to be available to all the people. And I think that's what people of New Hampshire expect. Doesn't matter whether or not you're a Democrat or independent, libertarian or vegetarian. You should have access to the governor's office, and the governor should be your advocate too. There's no litmus test applied to public service, and there should be none, particularly in the governor's office. And so I want people in New Hampshire to know that. That's the view I take of it. And I saw how people can work together, how they can disagree, and we need to continue to work hard to work together as we do the tough work that's required going forward in New Hampshire. I also served as chairman of the State Board of Education. I was appointed in 1993 by Governor Merrill, confirmed by the Executive Council, reconfirmed in 1996. I'm the only candidate for governor who's been part of the executive branch as a leader, appointed and confirmed by a governor and confirmed by the Executive Council. And the State Board of Education is not the usual path you take for political success if you're about politics only. But if you're about public policy, what more important thing can government do other than law enforcement and secure public safety, criminal justice, than education for our children? And our New Hampshire Constitution is really quite remarkable in the affirmative obligation it imposes on government to make sure that our children understand the basics of reading, writing, math, science, history, civics. And in addition, the Constitution, and I didn't bring my Constitution with me this evening, but if you read Part 2, Article 83, it also calls upon the magistrates and the legislatures of future generations to educate and inculcate the students of our state with character. They talk about sobriety, punctuality, the social affections necessary for an operating democracy. It's beautiful language. It's about making sure our students have character education too. And so when I was chairman of the State Board of Education, we lifted up character education as part of the job of our schools. We also did a lot of things that I think were very helpful in terms of moving the quality of education forward. I fought with the legislature to pass the first charter school legislation in the mid-90s with the help of Senator Jim Rubins. We changed our rules for teacher certification so that people from the business sector didn't have to spend 2 years in education limbo. They could go right into the classroom and start teaching with the help of a supervisor or a mentor who would help them go through their educational process as they went, so they get teacher certification over the course of time. But they could actually start right into the classroom, go for them from the laboratory of a business into the classroom of a public school. And we've seen a lot of people take advantage of that. We also did things like adopt New Hampshire Educational Assessment Program, which really started to assess student performance on core subjects at the 4th, 6th, and 8th, 10th grade level. And we wanted to see where students were, actually 3rd, 6th, and 10th grade level, where they were in terms of their progress. We could do a lot better than we're doing. But we need to move into a system that works for our students, for our families, for our teachers. I believe in decentralizing education, not centralizing it. And the biggest challenge we have in New Hampshire is the Claremont decisions that were rendered in the mid-90s. Now, I want to tell you that when I was appointed chairman of the State Board of Education, it was right around the time the first Claremont decision was handed down. As chairman of the State Board of Education, I was named as a defendant in the Claremont lawsuits. The last place a lawyer wants to see his name is as a defendant in a lawsuit, I can guarantee you that. But there I was, chairman of the State Board. I was a witness in the Superior Court decision that affirmed our delivery system, that said we do provide an adequate education and we provide adequate funding, albeit through local property taxes, working with local communities. And our Supreme Court in 1997 said, you know what? That may be true, but we disagree. We don't think the duty to educate is delegable to local cities and towns and school districts. It's the state's duty to provide education and to fund it, so that the education funding has to be evaluated by the state as the taxing district, which means you can't have true local control of funding over the programming of education under this Claremont decision. The only way we can move forward in the state to really move to a higher quality education is to decentralize. The only way we can do that is to adopt a constitutional amendment, which I hope will be on the ballot in 2012. And it'll be one of the starkest issues that will contrast the Republican nominee for governor, who I hope to be, with the Democratic nominee, who will want to side with the Claremont decisions, because you know what they know? If we don't deal with this, we're going to end up in a broad-based tax. I would call the statewide property tax a broad-based tax, because in some ways it is. But the liberals on the other side, our opponents, want the state to adopt an income or sales tax, so they get more money in Concord, and then they can divvy it out as they see fit. That is not going to help New Hampshire be the exceptional state it can be and ought to be that magnet for entrepreneurs, for families, for individuals to come and live the American dream right here in our state. So I'm committed to work with others to get that constitutional amendment passed. So I want you to know that I've worked in all three branches of our state government: legislative, executive, judicial. And I have argued cases successfully before the Supreme Court. You don't win them all, but you try to do your very best, right, Dennis? No matter where you are. But what you know is that if you don't have a good argument, you end up sounding like the Solicitor General, and who sounded like in the Supreme Court argument. Those of you who heard that. You don't have a good response to a question that's asked if you don't have a good response. Okay, there's only so much finesse, let me put it that way, you can provide the court if you don't have a good answer. And he did not have a good answer to, and he couldn't have a good answer to the questions they were properly asking in that Obama case. So if I'm the governor, I bring to governor's office experience in business, leadership experience in business, experience in the governmental sectors of our state, leadership experience there, and in the civic and charitable world, which I would submit to you is very much an important part of the delivery system of services in New Hampshire, and it makes us exceptional. The state doesn't do everything. It does it with the private sector. The Moore Center providing area services to the disabled, of our developmentally disabled citizens of our state. Easter Seals, Catholic Charities through the food bank. There is a matrix of private charitable organizations around the state that provide the best service because it's local, because it's one-to-one, and it doesn't have all the bureaucracy attached to it. So I've been the president of the Daniel Webster Council, our Boy Scout organization, that tries to bring leadership skills to 18,000 young men and women across the state with the help of 7,000 to 8,000 volunteers. That's a small army of dedicated New Hampshire people who are trying to live and breathe and implement and pass on the Scout Oath and Law. Don't you think New Hampshire could use more of the Scout Oath and Law? How about the rest of the country using the Scout Oath and Law as a way to live, as a way to function, as a way to serve? And so I'm proud to have been part of the Boy Scouts for a long time, and certainly as their president for 3.5 years. I've been on the board of Easter Seals. I've been involved with Moore Center Capital Campaign, the Food Bank's Capital Campaign, CASA of New Hampshire, one of those delivery systems that provides a voice to abused and neglected children in court through the help of volunteers. I believe in the private sector because I believe in people. You empower people, they can do extraordinary things. You say government is the only way to do it. You wring out of the system the exceptionalism, the extraordinary things people can do if they own the mission, if they own the service, if they're not told they have to do it this way, if they come to it because they want to serve. And that's uniquely New Hampshire. Do you know that East Seals of New Hampshire runs a number of East Seals organizations in our country in the Northeast? And that's the starkest to me is they run the New York City East Seals. And when Chris McMahon, a vice president of East Seals, was assigned to head up that organization, she called me one day. She said, Ovid, she goes, you wouldn't believe what a little New Hampshire ingenuity can do to cut red tape. She said, I came down here to this East Seals. They were paralyzed. They didn't know how to talk to bureaucrats. They didn't know how to work their way through the maze of rules and regulations that were choking what they were doing and getting in the way of provision of services. She said, I applied good old-fashioned New Hampshire common sense and got in front of those regulators and figured out how to try to get regulations waived and so forth. And now East Seals of New York City is functioning well, thanks to New Hampshire people landing in a state and in a city that you would never think could actually be helped by us. It can be helped by us. We need to have more faith in ourselves. You know, if you think about it, 50 years ago, the President of the United States, in his inaugural address, said two, I think, very exceptional things. One is that he remarked that the country, our America, was under assault because we're founded on the radical principle that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. The rights of man come not from the state, but from the hand of God. And that president went on to exhort the people, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That president was John F. Kennedy, a Democrat. And that president was not telling the people, you need your handout. We need more entitlement. That president said we should put ourselves on the moon. And that president was a leader who believed in American exceptionalism. And what's happened in 50 years? 47% of our people don't pay an income tax. We have almost half our population dependent on government services and largesse and entitlement programs. And there's a way of thinking. Some people think that's a good idea. I say no. Government should be a place of last resort. We know that in New Hampshire. Government has a role. But we ought to be relying on ourselves more, relying on our families and our local businesses. And so as the governor of the state of New Hampshire, I would want to work with the people of the state to try to come up with new and better ways to have government function, but to lift up the private sector in a much better way, whether it's business or civic and charitable work. Two other things I want to leave you with, and then we can take some questions. One is I've published a blueprint for New Hampshire, and I'll continue to work on our plan as we go forward and provide particulars. You will find it on ovid2012.com, which is our website, and on the back of the sheet that you've been given, it lists the items that I want to focus on. But what's really, I think, quite important is that we bring new leadership, that we have leadership for a change in the governor's office. I don't mean to disparage Governor Lynch, who I know and respect as an individual, and I respect the fact that he was willing to work with people across the aisle. But he was not a leader in the way that New Hampshire needs leadership. He was not involved with the legislative process the way he should have been. And I use the classic example of the last budget. He submitted a budget in 2011, beginning of 2011, to the legislature, said, this is what I want. And then he stepped away. Wasn't involved with the legislative process, and the legislators will tell you this. He wasn't in the halls and talking with them about where they were going. He let the legislature do its work, which was to balance the budget with real revenue estimates, and made cuts that were necessary. The legislature passes the budget, turns it over to the governor. What does he do? He says, this is awful. This is terrible. I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe they're doing that. And he sits back and lets the budget pass without a signature. That is not leadership. If I'm elected governor, I promise the people of New Hampshire I will either sign or veto any bill that comes to my desk. And that means I'll have to be a leader. Because God forbid that I'm sitting there and say, where did this come from? How come this is in that bill? And I'll have a staff that will be working with me to monitor the legislation, to work directly with the legislative leaders of our state, to come up to a solution that we can get behind. It's not leadership to say, I'll let something pass and almost give the sense of the people that you're not willing to enforce it. What's the executive branch of government supposed to do? Even the most basic civics lesson will tell you this. Enforce the law. The governor is the head of the executive branch. He needs to enforce the law. And so I'll be a proactive leader for New Hampshire. And on the regulatory side, which is where the executive branch actually has some power, as weak as this governor is in New Hampshire, the administrative agencies work in the executive branch. The second thing I'm going to do as governor is to impose a 90-day moratorium on any new rules and regulations and require all our state agencies to develop a robust economic impact analysis on the cost of these rules and regulations to municipalities, to businesses, to families, individuals. And tell us, as the people, why it is that we should be bearing this cost versus the benefits that you think this rule provides. And I want to see those reports myself before those rules become effective. And then I want to work with our administrative agencies to start peeling back rules and regulations that are outdated, conflicting, not giving clarity to what the executive branch should do. And then lastly, I will work with our legislative leaders to say to the legislative branch, send us bills that have all the details so we don't need rules and regulations. When you think about it, every time a bill is passed and power is delegated to the executive branch agencies to promulgate rules and regulations, what the legislature is doing is punting to the executive branch and basically transferring legislative power to the executive branch because rules and regulations have the force and effect of law. So I'm here to tell you I want less power as the governor of New Hampshire over the executive branch. I want the legislature to take its time to develop the law with the kind of specificity that will make rulemaking minimal. And let the legislature figure out the details. And I know the people can do it. That's why I support biennial sessions. 1 year on, 1 year off. Meet the first year, do your work on policy and pass the budget. The second year, study, develop, because you know there will be another session the following year. You may not be there, but set up the table for the people to take these bills that are being in process for improving the quality of life in New Hampshire and minimize the opportunity for mischief to be created by administrative agencies. I have too many clients I work with, business clients, who've had to deal and spend it with a lot of time and treasure and talent fighting bureaucracy where they shouldn't have to do it. Because of ambiguity in rules, because some administrator decides they're going to reapply the rules or the law in a different way. That's not helpful to us. We need to be pro-business. We need to make sure we have the best climate to do business. Stability, certainty is the best climate. And that's what we'll fight to do. So I thank you very much for the time you've given me to at least lay out at least my vision at this point for running for governor. I ask for your help. If you can help me financially, you can contribute online at ovid2012.com or write a check to Friends of Ovid 2012 and leave it with JP Marzullo, who's back there. So many of you may know JP. JP resigned his position at the Republican State Committee to work on our campaign, and he's done a great job networking with people, developing our grassroots, and being an ambassador for us. And I'm grateful to you, JP, for what you've done and for me. And JP brings, and as John O'Brien does as well too, who's been a volunteer, a kind of a can-do, optimistic spirit that we need. And of course I see Ray Chadwick here, and Ray has been wonderful about lifting up our platform. I've been a Republican State Committee platform chairman. I've worked in the platform. I believe in the platform. We are Republicans for what we believe in, not because we want to be part of a club, right? We're Republicans because we believe largely in what's in the platform. We need to know it, lift it up, share it with other people. And that's what I would leave you with as well in terms of our party. Continue to invite people to join our team. Tell them why you're a Republican and what the potential is if Republican principles are enacted to promote New Hampshire, to preserve our quality of life, to make us truly the live free or die state, and live up to our motto and our promise. So God bless you, God bless America, and God bless the great state of New Hampshire. Thank you. Okay, fire away. Yes, sir.
Yes, what is your position on casino gambling. It seems to be a current event.
Yeah, casino gambling was defeated today in the House. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. The question is, what is my position on casino gambling? My position is my presumption is to oppose casino gambling. I don't think it enhances the quality of life in New Hampshire. And I don't think because surrounding states do it that we need to do it. Surrounding states have adopted an income tax or sales tax. Do we need to do that? No. Massachusetts has the Red Sox and the Patriots and the Celtics and the Bruins and other great entertainment, most of which we can't replicate. So what are we going to do? We're going to be different than other states. We should be a place for families to come vacation and visit. We should be family friendly, and we should be casino free as far as I'm concerned. I will say this, however. I don't want to close the door completely to it. I'll entertain a proposal brought to me that's limited, focused, controlled, and that does not contribute to more government spending. It has to be revenues generated have to go to providing tax relief at the property tax level for education, if we're ever able to get back to using a targeted aid formula like Augenblick, or some other cost reduction that's a true cost reduction, not just a bypass or pass-through, so we continue to support government spending. And so if gambling is your issue and you want a pro-gambling person, you have to look for somebody else. But if you want somebody to be protecting the New Hampshire advantage and applying a cost-benefit analysis, weighing all factors with a potential limited introduction, you know, I'll be your guy. But please don't consider me an advocate for gambling, because I'm not. Yes?
You mentioned pension reform, and I think the numbers right now, even after the work that our legislators did last year, a step in the right direction, but I think we're still in a $4.5 billion deficit, somewhere in that ballpark for the pension. You mentioned moving from a defined contribution, or moving from a defined benefit to a defined contribution.
Yes.
What type of impact do you happen to know? Is there any run the numbers on that? What would that mean to where we're standing right now as far as the deficit?
Well, I haven't run the exact numbers on that, and I know there are people working on it. I would say this, that part of the projections for New Hampshire is forecasting at this rate what our liabilities will be, not just at the present time, but looking over the next few years as we go through, continue this defined benefit plan. So at least we can cap our liability, know what it is, and then try to find a way to lower or try to figure out how we're going to pay for that liability. We are one of the most out of balance states in the country when it comes to pension liability that's unfunded. So that's a huge problem. The first step is to start the contributory plan with new employees and to try to find ways of backing that into existing employees as best we can. The state laws are I think, pretty firm about the fact that once you make a commitment to employees, you have to honor them as a state. But that doesn't mean employees can't work with you either, you know, and we need to work with them. So it's going to be a multilateral approach. Current employees, dealing with them in one way, but new employees, dealing with them under a new plan that we should put in place. Yes, Sean?
You talked about the party platform, and years ago, Rona Charbonneau from Hudson was chairman of the state party,
Right.
And the philosophy at that time was we're under a big tent. And we had a much more broad platform, I think. It talked more about philosophy, what Republicans believed in general. In the last few conventions, the platform has moved to very specific items, and it seems to me there are certain members of the party who love nothing more now than to beat each other over the head, or others over the head, because they find a specific thing in the platform and say, well, you're not a good Republican because you don't support that specific. Do you think this has been helpful to get into that level of detail and beat each other up over issues?
Thank you, Sean. If I can restate the question is, has the platform become so prescriptive or specific that it's creating a situation where Republicans fight with each other over disagreements on a particular plank of the platform? Is that pretty much your question? Yeah. I don't think that the specificity or the prescriptions of the platform is what the problem is. The problem is the attitude that some Republicans have about the platform. And it's like anything else. Two people who are faith-filled Christians can take the same passage of the Bible and make two different arguments. They're still Christians. They have a different interpretation. Same thing with the Republican Party. We unfortunately have digressed into the situation where we're applying litmus tests. I don't believe in a litmus test. I think we need to have what a big tent means to me is that, and Ronald Reagan was quite good about this. He said, if you're 80% with me, you're my friend, not my 20% enemy. And he was identifying the problem that he was seeing happen with the conservative movement becoming really part of the Republican Party. And that is conservatives and, non-conservatives, for lack of a better word, were starting to find those issues that divided them, as opposed to saying, what are the issues that bring us together? And let's agree to disagree. One of the reasons I was honored to get the endorsement of Charlie Bass, and I endorsed him in return, not in return, but I endorsed him too, because I feel that this is the most important election in our lifetime. But Charlie and I don't agree on social issues. We don't agree on certain things. But we agree on far more than we disagree on. And I want to send a message to my conservative friends and to people in the Republican Party that we stand together, because he's going to be every day of the year far better than Annie McLean Custer is on her best day. Right? Are you with me on that? He is the incumbent congressman. There's no margin for error. This is not the time to let somebody cut their teeth on challenging an incumbent congressman because they're pro-life and he's pro-choice. We're not going to be debating pro-life and pro-choice if this country collapses. And if we don't do something right now to bring our budget into balance, to devolve power from Washington back to the states, mark my words, our country is going to collapse. And that's not alarmist. That is reality. This is not sustainable. If we don't understand that the time is urgent, if your hair is not on fire as a Republican right now, you're missing it. This is our time. So let's work together and let's not let the party platform divide us, especially if we're largely in the same thing. What upsets me is I heard people talking about primarying folks who are opposed to right to work. I'm for right to work, but I respect if somebody's opposed to it. I'm not going to let you hang out to dry because you're a Republican who is opposed to right to work. Okay, so we don't agree on that issue. Let's work on some other issues. And you're still part of the team. I still want to be part of your team. And that's the spirit we need to bring to this office of governor, of speaker, of Senate president, of leadership throughout the state. And it's not weak-kneed to learn how to agree to disagree and do it respectfully. It's not weak-kneed at all to work with people on those things you can agree on. And let's roll up our sleeves and get the job done. Our future, our children and our grandchildren depend on us. I have to say to you, I'm not here running for governor to serve you as much as I'm here to serve your children and your grandchildren and mine. And I feel very passionate about this. And I've got a great life. I've got plenty of scars in the political world to show that I've tried this before. I'm winning this time. I'm winning this time. Thank you, Sean. Yes, John.
Thank you for being here. Before I ask the question, I just want to say your concept of making New Hampshire a refugee state for entrepreneurs is a terrific concept, and the phrasing you used to express that concept.
Thank you.
Very catchy. You were talking about Obamacare. When you become governor of Montana, you direct the Attorney General to file suit against the federal government.
Right.
And the Attorney General says, sorry, Governor, I can't do it. Do you have a backup plan for that?
I do, and thank you for the question. I've been reading the New Hampshire Constitution. And let me tell you this. If the Attorney General says no, says I'm a Democrat or I've been appointed by Governor Lynch, I'll do it myself. The governor of New Hampshire can bring a lawsuit in his own name on behalf of the people in the state of New Hampshire over these fundamental principles, and I'll do it myself. And I'll tell you what, another pledge I'm going to have, and part is my Ovid's Oath for version 2 for the governor's race, is letting people know that, on the day I'm inaugurated, we're joining that suit, whether it's through the Attorney General's office or by my own filing, by signing my own papers that I'll have ready to go. because I feel that passionately about fighting the federal government on Obamacare and on the federal takeover of health care. We should actually be joining the healthcare compact that's being promoted among the states, that's basically asking the federal government to block grant Medicare and Medicaid monies to the state and let us decide how best we're going to cover the lives of our senior citizens. Don't you think it's better for you to be calling somebody in Concord or in your local community about your health care than it is in Washington trying to fight the big bureaucracy, the bloated bureaucracy we have for Medicare or Medicaid? We're much better suited if we manage it ourselves. Again, a locally developed, administered program like health care. That's the direction we should be going on, and that's the direction I'd go in. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you very much, Ovide. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All the questions. We're going to bring Giuliano back up, but hopefully you can stay